students, welcome to another session of The Analyst. Now, today we'll look at 5 important articles from the Indian Express and the Hindu. The first will be about secularism. Here we'll look into the Indian model of secularism, the Western model of secularism, as well as we'll look into the essential practices doctrine, which is the judicial interpretation of secularism. Then we'll look at carrying capacity of an ecosystem. Then we'll look at central bank digital currency or e-rupee. Then we'll look at IAEA and what do we mean by white collar jobs. Now, the first article pertains to your GS1 secularism. It also pertains to your GS2 where we were discussing constitutional issues. Now, what is the context? The context is that the French government has banned abaya to be worn by students in state-run schools, and that is why the debate about French model of secularism has come in the news. Now, what do we mean by secularism? So, it is a separation. It is what? It is separation between the state and the religion. Why? Because historically, it has been seen that whenever religion influenced the policy, the laws of the state, then what would happen? Injustice would happen. Now, what do we mean by state? So, in Indian context, state comes from your Article 12. So, it includes all your bodies, whether it is the central government, whether it is the state government, whether it is local bodies, whether these are other authorities. So all organs of the state, all instrumentalities of the state are bound by the secular principles in governance. Now let's look at why do we need secularism? Because there must be separation between state and religion. That means what? Any, let's say, act is there, any policy is there, any action, executive action is there. So state must not help, aid and abet any particular religion. Why? Because let's say if the state promotes one particular religion, then what will happen to the other religions? They might feel suffocated, right? Then we must preserve the diversity. And whenever we are talking about diversities, we have multiplicity of identities. What kind of identities? Let's say religious, let's say based upon race, religion, caste, region, place of birth, linguistic identities or language. So what do we see in India? That we have multiple identities. And whenever we have multiple identities, whenever we are diverse, it also makes us more resilient. So our society becomes more resilient. And the moment I homogenize my society, the moment I simplify this diversity, so what will happen? Its resilience will go away, its flair will go away. Then the freedom of thought. So these rights are not only parts of your human rights, but are also part of your fundamental rights under part 3. So whenever we are talking about thought, expression, speech, that also means that I'm also thinking about something. So I also have the right to think. And naturally, if I am thinking, then I can also believe. That simply means that my fundamental rights, my freedoms also entail my right to have a conscience, my right to believe in something, my right to have some faith, and that faith might be religious in nature. And therefore, it is nothing but your expression. So whenever I am saying I believe in a particular faith, I believe in certain tenets, is it not part of our expression itself, right? So somewhere down the line, we must understand that these rights are expressed from the preamble to the fundamental right and is in every part of the constitution. So it is in the basic rubric of the Indian constitution. Now let's look at various types of secularism. So one is the US model. So here the religion is a private affair and there is arm length distance with the state and state has no religion. But the separation between religion and state is not watertight. That means there might be some state intervention. Let's say when debates of life versus abortion, or whenever cultural rights come in way of constitutional rights, then such debates can be opened and there can be state intervention. What do you mean by state intervention? That means whenever we see any unfair practice which is being promoted in the name of religion, then the state can intervene. But we maintain a arm's length distance. What about the French model? So in the French model, it is an extreme form of secularism where there is watertight separation. And no form of religious symbols, so no symbol which shows your identity, religious identity, can be worn in public. So let's say I'm wearing a dhaga or I'm wearing a scarf. So all of that becomes a problem if I am displaying my religion in public through any means, right? So this is strict separation. That means state will never intervene in religious affairs, and whenever in public space, whenever in public sphere, there should be no representation, no religious activities and symbols are completely banned in public spheres. So this is strict separation. Now, that also means that debates about, let's say, burkina, or let's say abaya, or let's say hijab. So all such debates are very prominent. Why? Because the state wants some form of assimilation. So immaterial of what religion you follow, immaterial of where you are coming from. If you are a French citizen, if you are a French national, then you assimilate and you adopt the French way of living. Now there are good components of assimilation also in the US model. On the other hand, if we look at the UK model, it is based upon promoting diversity and more rights to minorities. And this is also called a salad bowl model. So 3 models. Now let's understand what is the Indian model of secularism. So our model flows from the ancient ideas of Sanatan Dharma, from our Vedas, Upanishads, Purans, and thereby we have appreciated religious tolerance. And this can be seen in the, let's say, Bhakti movement as well as the Sufi movement. So multiple streams came in and all the best practices from all various faiths, religious activities, cultural activities were adopted into the Indic culture. And therefore, the ideas of religious toleration and peaceful coexistence has existed for thousands of years. Then the idea of secularism in Indian context is about dharm nirpekshata and panth nirpekshata. When I say panth, I mean sect. When I say dharma, I mean religion. So Indian model of secularism is not only talking about equality of view from the state when it comes to religion, but also to sects. So a religion may have multiple sects, multiple set of believers who have different practices, different cultural practices. So each of them will be treated equally by the state. So that is the idea of dharm nirpekshta as well as pant nirpekshta. Then the idea of sarv dharm sambhav. So the wisdom is that there can be multiple paths of salvation, but the end goal is same, and therefore treating all the faiths equally. And so Indian model of secularism is called the positive model of secularism. So what is the role of state in this model of secularism? So state will go for principled distance. So in the US model, we had arm's length. Here we have principled distance. That means in some matters, state will have no interference. But in other matters, it will interfere. And what are these matters? So let's say there is anything where any religious practice which affects our individual rights, or it affects, let's say, community rights, or let's say it promotes social injustice. So religion or religious activities cannot be used to violate the basic rights, the fundamental rights, or to violate the basic structure, or to violate the constitutional morality, to say so the ethos of the Indian constitution. Right. So principle distance, positive model of secularism, and the state will have no religion. So the state is not religious. That means state cannot be correlated or cannot be associated with one dharma or one religion. It is not anti-religious. That means state is not coming close to any religion. It is not abolishing religion also. Then it is what? It is non-religious. So neither religious nor anti-religious or irreligious, but is non-religious. That means state has no religion of itself. Now, what will state do? So state shall recognize and accept all religions. So all paths, sarv dharm sambhav. And state will not favor or patronize any particular religion. Now, let's look at the constitutional articles where we can find secularism. So we do not find the word secular in the constitution, and it was only included in the preamble in 1972 with the 42nd constitutional amendment. But the wisdom of secularism is there. How? So 14 calls for equality before law. That means this equality is also about treating people of two religion equally. And 15 explicitly prohibits discrimination on ground of religion. It is one of the grounds, right? Then 16 again, no discrimination on the basis of religion in public employment. Then whenever we see Article 25 talks about the freedom of conscience as well as triple P. Triple P is profess, practice and propagate one's religion. Article 26 gives us the right to establish and maintain institutions for religious and charitable purposes. That means here I can have a belief and I can promote that belief. Now to promote that belief, I can create institutions also. And Article 27 says that the state cannot ask for a tax or any levy or any charge to promote a particular religion. So, principal distance from all religions. Then, Article 28 says that educational institutions maintained by different religions group to impart religious instructions. That means the state also allows various religious groups to create their own institutions and to teach the religious philosophies, right? Now let's look at the Article 25, because Article 25 completely tells us what is the state's action What is the role of state in secularism? So, freedom of conscience and free profession, practice and propagation of religion, subject to public order, A, morality, B, C, health, and other provisions of this part. Now, let's read 2. So, 25.2 says, nothing in this article shall affect the operation of any existing law or prevent the state from making any law, A, regulating or restricting any economic, financial, political or other secular activities. Please understand this word, secular activities, which may be associated with religious practice. B, providing for social welfare and reform or throwing open of Hindu religious institutions of public character to all classes and section of Hindus. That means what? That from 25 to the state gets the power to regulate all secular functions. So, what is the other function? The other is the religious function. So, let's say I am expressing myself, religiously expressing myself. So, the state will see whether this function is a secular function or it is a religious function. Let's say there is accounting of the donations to a charitable institution, to a religious institution. Is it an important part of the religious activity or is it a non-essential part of the religious activity? So, any non-essential part will be called the secular function. And if there is any wrongdoing in the secular functions, that means the state will now intervene. So, state already got the ground to public order, morality and health and other provisions of this part. But it also got the power to restrict, let's say, our religious freedom on what ground? If it is a secular activity or if it is to do about welfare or to say so, to fight against any forms of social injustice. And we can take the example of, let's say, untouchability or prohibiting entry to any particular community, etc. That means the state will not object to me practicing the essential parts of my religion. And that is how the essential practices doctrine came into being. So, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar talked about the essential practices doctrine in the Constituent Assembly debates. And he said that the interpretation of Article 25 of the Indian Constitution, it aimed to evaluate whether religious practices could withstand the test of constitutional morality. So let's say a religion is there and there are 10 practices. Now, 3 of these practices are the core of my religion. So, as an individual who has religious rights, the constitution would protect the core religious identities. But let's say there are some secular activities and let's say there is some embezzlement of funds, or let's say there is some social injustice. Then what can the state do? The state can take over these activities. It can bring a law to ensure that such social injustice or embezzlement doesn't happen. Now, it is intended to distinguish between the religious practices and the secular practices. And the moment we are talking about the religious practices, we must appreciate the essential practices doctrine. So, a religion will have some practices. Some of those practices will be essential and the rest will be secular practices. So, the state will do nothing about the essential practices, but for the secular practices, the state can bring law as well as the judiciary can also intervene. And let's take some examples. So, this went to the courts in the Shirur Mutt case of 1954, and the Supreme Court started using this essential practices doctrine or essential practices test to judge what? to judge whether some religious activity is secular or it is part of essential practice. And if it is a secular practice, whether there are some violation of rights, and if there are some violation of rights, they can be nullified. Right? So it also opened the floodgates of judicial interpretation into matters of religion. And some examples are the recently triple talaq case, then the entry of women into Sabrimala, then the pending petitions of FGM. So female genetic mutilation, all female circumcision case is pending, and this happens in the Daudi Vora community. So female genetic mutilation as well as entry of women in mosque, those are pending. Why? Because the Sabrimala case, which allowed the entry of women into temple, that is under review. And once the Sabrimala review is done, then the judgments will come on female genetic mutilation as well as entry of women into mosque. Then very recently in the hijab case, the Karnataka hijab ban case, the essential practices were invoked, where it was, the question was whether hijab is an essential practice of Islam. Now, what is the criticism? The criticism is that this gives the judiciary immense amount of right to go into areas which can be decided by individuals. And judges lack religious teaching or expertise. Furthermore, the ideas of constitution should not completely trump the religious freedoms. So the ideas of judges being individuals, then judges lacking any religious teaching or having very little religious teaching, then the voluminous amount of texts which are at times referred and at times many texts are ignored. Why? Because it brings a lot of subjectivity in these cases. So it is said that the essential practices test has become arbitrary and it can be misused to do what? To decrease the religious freedoms. Now, summing up, what did we see? We saw the various forms of secularism. We saw how the constitution interprets it, and then we saw what is the essential practices doctrine. Now, all of that content can be used in your essays, in your ethics, as well as in your GS 1 and 2 papers, whenever it deals about some kind of rights, or whenever we are talking about, let's say, religious aspects, secularism, to say so. The next article is related to carrying capacity, and this pertains to your GS 3 environment. Now, what is the context? The center has proposed to reevaluate the carrying capacity of the Himalayan states. Why? Because we are looking at incessant rains, we are looking at floods, and we are looking at landslips or landslides. So, the excessive rain triggered a lot of localized floods as well as landslides, which has created havoc and devastation in Himalayan states. And that is why the center is proposing a 13-member body to look at the carrying capacity of all Himalayan states. Now, let's understand what is carrying capacity. So, let's say we give all resources. Let's say resources are unlimited. Okay, let's say we have all the essential ingredients of a let's say dish. So how much of that dish we can make? So there is no limit, unlimited, right? Let's say we have unlimited water, we have unlimited coal, we have unlimited forest resources. So how many people can sustain? Unlimited, because there is no limit to our resources. But what is the reality? So when we have unlimited resources, then the population can be exponential. So we can multiply and keep on multiplying. But in reality, the issue is that there are some cap, there is some level, there is some limit of any resource. And given that there is limit on the resource, so as individuals, as communities, we cannot have unlimited numbers. So there is a limit till which people can live in a particular area, and the population limit of a particular species of living in a particular region will be called as the carrying capacity. So let's say this particular area can sustain only 1,000 people and 2,000, let's say, animals. So this number of population is the carrying capacity of that region. But what do we see? We see that some regions of the world, some regions of India is overpopulated, some regions are underpopulated. And let's take some examples. Let's say the Gangetic Plains. So very high population density. What about underpopulation? Can we talk about Ladakh or Arunachal? Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh, they are sparsely populated regions, right? Now, one reason for them being highly populated is that this region also has a higher carrying capacity. Why? Because it has fertile soil, it has water, it has the Gangetic river system, which makes it fertile. Once there is alluvial soil, there is good amount of water, there is good amount of rain. So what will happen? Good agriculture practices. So once food is done for, you can till the soil, you can get your food, food security is there, then what will happen? People will start settling. And so settlements come up. But what happens in difficult terrains, difficult topographies? So these regions are sparsely populated. Therefore, different regions, different spaces have different carrying capacity. And this carrying capacity over the period of time can also change. Why? Let's say I used to get 100 liters of water from Ganga, but today I am getting only, let's say, 60 liters of water. So if one of the input of the ecosystem has changed, then will the carrying capacity will also be affected. And we have just seen that the Gangetic river system is extremely important for the entire northern plains. So if the quantum of water is decreased, then the carrying capacity can also decrease. Now, what do we see in a general basis? In general, what do we see? So we see that over the period of time, the degradation has increased. Degradation of the ecosystem has increased in all the regions of Himalayan states. So once there is degradation in form of, let's say, you have artificial forest fires, you have deforestation, we are making more infrastructure, we are cutting terraces. So many different examples that we have discussed. So what will happen over the period of time? Will the carrying capacity of Himalaya remain same, or will it also decrease over the period of time? Now, parallelly, what do we see? Parallelly, we see that our demand is increasing. And why our demand is increasing? Because the population is increasing. And if the population is increasing, let's say this is population, then the demand will also increase. But over the period of time, what do we see? That the carrying capacity is decreasing. And whenever there is clash between demand and supply in nature, what happens? Some shocks can come. And whenever this demand outstrips the supply, so overshoot. And the moment there are overshoots, so what happens? Some form of hazard can trigger. What are these? Are these not examples of these shocks because of the demand supply mismatch? Let's take an example. Let's say only 5,000 people can go to Shimla per day. Okay. But during summers, let's say 20,000 people have arrived in Shimla only from Delhi. So 20,000 people are directly coming from Delhi to Shimla. So what will happen is that there will be immediate water scarcity. Immediate water scarcity. So what will people do? People will start installing more powerful pumps to pump more water. And because I am earning well from the tourist potential of my region, will I stop? Will I ever stop? So I'll keep on degrading, and this becomes a vicious cycle. Now, in all our models, we have a very poor assumption of saying that carrying capacity is constant. But in reality, the carrying capacity is degrading, and this degradation is because of two factors which we have discussed. One is anthropogenic factors as well as the natural factors. So, whenever due to these shocks the carrying capacity is decreasing, simultaneously the population keeps on increasing, and therefore the demand also keeps on increasing. So whenever there is a mismatch, these leads to potential shocks, and these potential shocks amplify in their size and in their impact because these shocks connect with each other to create the cascading hazards that we saw in Himachal Pradesh. Right? So this constant function that we assume today of carrying capacity is also decreased because of what? Because of today vagaries of nature in form of climate change. So today we have to look back and look at the Himalayan region and all these cities as well as all the regions in the Himalayas, and look at what kind of population can be sustained. Are we overpopulated? Are we over compressing a small city, let's say a tourist city like Shimla, or are we over compressing Manali? Manali's roads have been completely inundated, they have been completely destroyed. Is it also part of the mass tourism because of creation of 4-lane highways? And this brings us to the concept of optimum population. Now, what do we mean by optimum population? So this says that we ought to have an optimum population peak, and whenever we are underpopulated, we are basically misusing. It would be wrong to use misusing, but we are not able to use resources. Let's say there is too much of coal, but there are few people. Let's say there is too much of oil, but we are not able to explore. So what will happen? So due to which my incomes will also be low. Then there comes a time where there is overpopulation. There are too many people vis-a-vis what? Vis-a-vis resources. So then what will happen? Then I will start getting underpaid. Why? Because there is too much competition. So according to these ideas, we can take some examples. Let's say underpopulation, Siberia. Let's say overpopulation, let's say Bangladesh, South Asia. And what is optimum population? Let's say Western Europe or the US, Canada. So there must be some balance between resources as well as population, and simultaneously This optimum population will also help us to stay within the limits that the ecosystem has created. And because there has been degradation in these carrying capacity, we need to take some measures. So what is the way forward? We must look at optimum population, whether we are looking at our states or our cities, and more particularly our tourist cities. Why? Because they are facing the vagaries of the issues of mass tourism, volume tourism, right? Then the idea of climate resilience, inbuilt climate resilience in all processes, including farming. Then we have to look at region specific development. One size fits all approach does not work. Why? Because the Western Ghats are completely different from the Himalayas. So we need to come up with region specific developmental strategy. And then the ideas of ecosystem rejuvenation. Let's say 1,000 acres of forest have been deforested, so again go for rejuvenation of the same regions, rejuvenate them, maybe double the area of forest. Then use of electric vehicle to decrease the carbon footprint in the region. And we discussed the case study of Ladakh plastic bottle case study. To say it briefly, if I go to Ladakh, every day I'll take 5 or 6 liters of water and I will use 5-6 bottles of this plastic bottle, single use plastic, and then I'll throw it off. So I stay there for 5 days, so 25 bottles, and these 25 bottles first were taken to Ladakh via diesel guzzling trucks, and then when it becomes a waste product, it pollutes the environment for a little while or for some months, and then it is again bought back by diesel guzzling vehicles. So again more black carbon, more brown carbon on the ice, on the frozen areas, which is leading to more melting, right? So all in all, we have to look at more sustainable, more ecological models of human behaviors. Then adoption of green and clean energy. Example, the airport at Leh. Then EIA based infrastructure development. So even though some of the infrastructure becomes emergent for even the local people there in the Himalayan states, however, without environmental impact assessment, social impact assessment, infrastructure projects can have very detrimental effects not only on the ecosystem but more so on the communities living nearby. Why? Because it can trigger future hazards and future disasters, and if multiple hazards they overlap with each other, they can create even larger hazards, which are called the cascading hazards. Then disaster resilience in building codes, and this is must. So we cannot build the way we build in Delhi, in let's say Himachal Pradesh. So different building codes suited to their region, suited to their topography, suited to their soil has to be adopted, not only in the government bodies but also in the areas of tourism, more particularly in the tourist cities. Now let's look at the third article, and this pertains to your GS3. Now we are talking about central bank digital currency or e-rupee. So why this is in news? Because the RBI governor Dr. Shashikanta Das, he said that cross-border payments can be done more efficiently with CBDC. Now why do we need a CBDC? A central bank digital currency? Because we must look at the backdrop. So it was the time of COVID-19. So cash was seen as a source of infection. This led to digitization of transaction. Then parallelly we had the ecosystem of UPI. So UPI took a massive jump, an exponential rise due to COVID. After this, we also had the adoption of, let's say, blockchain technology. And this blockchain technology was used for cryptocurrencies. Then we also saw that cryptocurrency led to huge financial gains. So naturally, the cryptocurrency investing and people making money from cryptocurrency, it was overhyped during COVID, post COVID. So shocks as well as cryptocurrency, it led to a lot of people investing in these crypto assets, digital assets. And 10% of UK's citizens, they have invested in one or the other form of digital assets. So Bitcoins, stable coins, and then NFTs. So people have continuously invested. So what happened? That the central banks as well as the governments all across the world, they got worried. Why? Because the government were looking at transactions involving cryptocurrency which are used by organized crimes, and they are being used for money laundering. They are used by terrorist groups, right? Secondly, the central bank was looking at the conversion of all currencies into dollar. So let's say I have 500 rupees. So first I'll convert it into dollar, or I will simply buy a coin which is indexed to the dollar. That means this was leading to dollarization, further dollarization of world. So given that there was demand for a digital currency, world across, all the central bankers, they have started looking at a central bank digital currency, because they cannot take the financial risk of another crisis which can be because of, let's say, cryptocurrency or some other digital assets. Simultaneously, the governments and the central bank can also not allow the dollarization of economy or the flight of capital to other digital forms. So they are offering an alternative. And let's understand how it works. So it is a form of digital currency, right? It is a digital currency just like any other currency, but it is issued by central bank. It is not issued by an individual, or it is peer to peer. It is issued by central bank. That means it is a legal tender. Then it is similar to cryptocurrency in form of it is a digital asset, but its value is fixed. So there is no fluctuations, bust and boom cycles which goes on in cryptocurrency or any digital assets. Then it is as good as cash. Now, how it is different? How it is different from, let's say, a UPI. So let's say I have to transfer you 10,000 rupees through UPI. So what I'll do is I'll send it to you, but the money goes from my bank to your bank. So bank account is involved. But whenever we are talking about e-rupee or our central bank digital currency, so what we are doing, I will have my mobile phone, and in the phone I will have a wallet, a digital wallet, and this wallet will have, let's say, 10,000 rupees. So without the use of internet, without anything, I can just scan or tap and pay. So that is the idea of digital rupee. So I do not have to transfer every time I am doing a UPI transaction. I am not going for actually bank to bank transfer. Rather, let's say I have my wallet. So in my wallet, there are 10,000 rupees. And in my digital wallet, in my phone, I have 10,000 rupees. So as good as cash, and no need of internet for sending it or peer to peer I'm exchanging. Now we have gone for a pilot. And this pilot is applicable on two categories, a retail e-rupee and wholesale category. And this is some private banks as well as state banks, they are involved in this process. So it is not completely rolled out. But what are the potential benefits? So A, it will aid the GSEC market. Why? Because lakhs of crores of transaction will happen without even the involvement of physical cash. No use of physical cash. So directly digital assets. Then interbank transaction. And very recently, the RBI governor on the eve of G20, he is saying that this e-rupee must also be seen in light of internationalization of rupee. So internationalization of rupee, how? By using it in terms of trade with partners like UAE, Russia. So any country which is accepting rupee, the way yuan is being accepted around the world. So the government of India and RBI together, they want for internationalization of rupee. So it will help in also reducing the dollar dependency, and it will also lower the operational cost because the cash costs will almost go zero. And then the capital markets. So anywhere where lakhs of crores of transactions are being made, there e-rupee can be a game changer, and it is a step towards internationalization of the Indian rupee. Now this article pertains to your GS2. So Iran has expanded its nuclear stock. Now let's look at the backdrop. So Iran is under sanctions. Why? Because it is accused of building nuclear weapons. How? Through enrichment. So these sanctions are unilateral sanctions imposed by the West. Why these sanctions are imposed? Why such curbs? Why IAEA will inspect all the sites of Iran? Because to prevent nuclear proliferation. And because of which the entire Iranian economy is facing the music since last 5 to 6 years. And that is why IAEA is in news. Now let's look at this institution. This can become a prelim question. So it is also called Atoms for Peace and Development. It means peaceful use of nuclear energy. Then it is under the ambit of United Nations, created in 1957, and it is an independent international organization that reports annually to UNGA, directly to UNGA. Then it also reports to UN Security Council, UNSC. In case the members that there is non-compliance with safeguards and security. So the idea is that if someone is going for nuclear fuel, that nuclear fuel should be used only for, let's say, peaceful purposes, let's say for radiation therapies, let's say for power generation, but not for enrichment, which can be used in weapon development. Now its headquarters is in Vienna, Austria. And what is its work? So member states and multiple partners worldwide, they will promote safe, secure and peaceful use of nuclear technology. This institution also got a Nobel Prize in 2005. Now let's look at the last article. So white collar hiring slides 6% as IT auto turns cautious. So white collar hiring has decreased, or they have plummeted. What does it show? So one thing is that IT is not doing well globally. And there are talks of also a lot of firing in global IT majors, global CS majors, including the Mang. Secondly, the recovery post-COVID is not robust. While some sectors of the economy are doing well, the others are not doing well. Why? Because white collar hiring is not improving. Now, what do we mean by white collar? So essentially, people who are involved in management services, who are office workers. Now, let's look at different types of collars. So the top is gold collar workers. So they are highly skilled, knowledgeable, and they basically work in the knowledge economy. So they can be doctors, they can be your R&D professionals, they can be your scientists, they can be consultants, lawyers. Then green collar workers. So green collar workers are working in the green energy and the clean energy sector. Let's say someone is working in green hydrogen, or someone is working in solar energy. Then we have open collar workers, and this is a new category of workers who are essentially freelancers and who are going for work from home. So post-COVID, what has happened? That along with freelancing, along with work from home opportunities, hybrid kind of workplaces are being created. Then black collar workers. So they are essentially working in the mining, oil industry, as well as black marketing activities. Then we have blue collar workers, or essentially factory workers. And then we have pink collar workers. These are low paid jobs like librarian and receptionist. This is also a form of glass ceiling, and this is also a form of objectification at times. Or we can say that this is essentially against fair treatment of women. Why? Because we'll see that a lot of jobs are just reserved for women, and there is also a glass ceiling. That means what? That you can be a receptionist and you are expected to be a receptionist and have no further promotion because there is a glass ceiling. So having a receptionist at a hotel, at a restaurant, so there is preference for females. So this can also be used as an example of discrimination or as an unfair practice against women. Thank you so much. I hope it helped.